Okay, hi everybody. We're going to start the event. Thank you so much for being here. This is an event called Unite Against Imperialism, and it's sponsored by Michigan Peace Council, the chapter of the U.S. Peace Council, which is affiliated with the World Peace Council. And if any of you know that, it's one of the largest peace organizations in the world. And we just started our branch up here in Detroit again. It's been here since the 80s, and now it's revived again. As you know, this was an event a couple months ago, part one. We had five groups here. Actually, they were, as a matter of fact, the General Baker Institute had a representative, the Yemen Liberation Organization, the CPUSA, the LRNA, and WILF, Women's International League. We had a wonderful discussion, and that video is available on our channel on YouTube. That's the Michigan Peace Council channel. So if you could all subscribe to that, that would be really wonderful. You don't have to look at all the videos, but just subscribe to it. That'd be nice. All right, and this will be recorded and put on there. So my name is Bill Meyer, the chair of the Michigan Peace Council, and Twyla Meyer is co-chair, treasurer actually, and then Linda Rayburn is the co-chair. Linda, could you identify yourself back there? She was the one who welcomed you all into the room. Linda is our co-chair. She's going to take over for me at the end if I have to leave before we finish it. So this is a tough subject, obviously. It's like calling people together to talk about racism or something. I mean, it's not like everybody wants to talk about something that's tough to deal with. Imperialism is rarely talked about. And as we go on here, you'll see that there's reasons why. This is a wide range of political groups, but we're dealing with imperialism and people on the left, and the approach from the left. And there's a wide range of the left. It's not only communists and socialists who are against imperialism, many other people are too. So this is an open invitation to everybody to be part of the struggle to learn about what imperialism is. I know you didn't get a chance to, but we put posters around the room. And they have blue tape on top of them. They're flyers, posters dealing with this issue of imperialism. And I think if you read any of those, you'll know exactly why we're here talking about imperialism. Some shocking facts in these flyers that are on the wall. So make sure you get a chance to look at them. So I want to start out before we introduce the panel with just a couple quotes, so we get an idea of where we're at here. This is a quote from a guy named Greg Godels, ML Today, and he says, an anti-imperialist left is emerging in the West. That's us. However, they are derided by both liberals and leftists alike. The left's failure to grasp the central importance of imperialism in today's divisive geopolitical landscape leads to support for aggression, uncritical repeating of unfounded propaganda claims, and support for far-right currents in other countries that claim to stand for democracy. Class struggle rages within the left when it should be waged by the left. The left is thus now at a crossroads. That section of the Western left, which is proving unable to understand the role of imperialism in shaping today's conflicts, not only places itself on the verge of historical irrelevance, but becomes a real threat to the advance of people's struggles. The cause of the most urgent problems facing humanity, war, colonialism, mass poverty, racial and gender oppression, ecological destruction, and pandemics, have to be debated out in the framework of a clear understanding that they are products of imperialism. That was a quote from Greg Godels. One more short quote from Ron Jacobs. Ukraine is a perfect war for the U.S. Dominated military-industrial complex. There are no body bags coming home, no anti-war demonstrations, and virtually no pressure for negotiations. Indeed, a substantial portion of what usually constitutes the U.S. anti-war movement is actually cheering on the Ukrainian military in this conflict. In short, this is a dream situation, and Washington and its minions will fight to the last Ukrainian to keep the war industry's profits rolling in. That's Ron Jacobs. So with that framework, I want to introduce you to the panelists we have here. And I don't know if we're going to go left to, we lined them up according to political spectrum, left to right. No, according to looks. I don't know. No, they actually just sat where they wanted to sit. That's how it happened. Free form. So the left is very big. And we got to keep in mind that we're on two levels here. We're on a political level and on a personal level. A lot of these people are my friends, and I've been friends with them for a long time. And even though we don't agree on everything politically, that's all right. We have to agree to work together to try to solve the main problems that we all want to solve. So I want to introduce you first to Rita Jacobs, who is from the Green Party of Michigan. She's been a member of the Green Party U.S. Peace Action Committee since 2018 and served for 2 years as its co-chair. She's a founding member and original co-chair of the Green Party U.S. Banking and Monetary Reform Committee. So you can ask her the monetary financial questions. She joined the Green Party in Michigan in 2015 and has served in several offices in the state party. So let's welcome Rita Jacobs. The next guest we have is from Peace Action of Michigan. No stranger to this place. He lives here, he lives all over the peace movement, and he's consistently active in everything. And we're very thrilled to have Reverend Richard Peacock. And you didn't give me a bio, but we all know all the stuff you do. So let's give him a nice welcome. From the YCL, Young Communist League, which, first of all, that's a group that's been around since the 30s, I mean, almost 100 years, and it's had its ups and downs, of course. During the Red Witch Hunt days and all that, they had to go underground and stuff, but it's amazing that it's being revived with a lot of very active, energetic young people. The YCL is represented tonight by a gentleman who just filled in at the last minute, even though he's quite qualified to be here. It's just that he came a long way to fill in. Came all the way from Lansing. We're very grateful that he filled in the chair. This is Spencer Leslie. And then Mitchell Bonga is from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, yes. And I've seen you before, but you were at our last panel discussion and spoke in the Q&A, and I was very impressed with what you said, so I hope you remember what that was and continue on. But Mitchell's a great speaker, and the importance is that we can all relate to each other as individuals. We may not agree politically. Like I said, anti-imperialism is not communist and socialist. It's people who understand the role of imperialism in history and the crimes it's committing. His name is Mitchell Bonga, and let's give him a welcome. Now, the way we're going to run this is we're just going to have 3 or 4 questions we're going to ask. The first one is pretty much to describe your group and the work it does around the issue of imperialism. So we'll learn more about each individual as they say that, and each one will speak once the 4 are done, or during that time. If you have any questions, the audience is going to be invited to speak anytime you want to. And if you really have the urge to say, wait a minute, what did you just say? I didn't understand that, or excuse me. All you got to do is raise your hand, and Cameron here is in charge of the mic, and we want to back and forth if we need it, for clarification, not to argue necessarily, but for clarification. And short, if you can. Later on, at the end of the discussion, after 3 or 4 questions we're going to discuss, then we'll open it up to public comment at length. The first question is about describing your group and the position it has in relation in the left. Where are you in the left? There. How do you describe your position? Who do you work with? What does your group stand for? What does it do around the struggle against imperialism? So I didn't put anybody in any order. I'm just going to ask for a volunteer to be first. And if no one raises their hand, then I'll just pick somebody. Who wants to be first? Thank you, Mitchell. Okay. So Mitchell Bonga is going to describe his group.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mitchell Bonga. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the Detroit branch of it. We're a national revolutionary Marxist organization that seeks to replace capitalism, which is the source of so many crises throughout humanity all over the world with a socialist system. And so that's where our name Socialism and Liberation comes from. We want a government and economy run by the people, for the people, the working class, instead of a handful of few who own the big corporations. And then the liberation aspect comes in, our commitment to the right of nations to self-determination, making sure that all those around the world can actually have control over their own destinies without interference from the large imperialist countries that seek to dominate them and control their destinies on their own terms. And so overall, even though the Detroit branch is a bit newer to the area, all across the country, the PSL is struggling against imperialism, working with groups. We're part of the International People's Assembly, but down here, you know, we're willing to work with anybody that's committed to fighting against militarism, the economic domination of the U.S. and Europe over the rest of the world, and yeah, that about sums it up.
Okay, well, I have a question for you. Can you give me a little history of how you got to that name? Was it a split off of some other groups? Just put it in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Party for Socialism and Liberation was founded in 2004 after splitting from the Workers' World Party. And although I don't know the exact history of the name, I believe that it was because of that commitment to both of those principles, fighting for the socialist transformation of society and liberation for all by adhering and making a reality the right of nations to self-determination.
Anybody have something they want to ask? This chapter in Detroit, it's the latest one, the newest one?
I wouldn't say the newest one, but we are relatively new. Just popped up a couple years ago.
Are there any names that we can associate with your organization that are popular?
You know, you might know organizers like me, maybe Theron Combs.
I mean nationally.
Nationally, Brian Becker, Gloria LaRiva, Richard Becker, Eugene Puryear, a lot of fantastic folks doing a lot of great work across the country.
Great.
So yes, I remember Eugene Puryear. He has a great podcast. I forget the name of it, but I don't know how many of you listen to podcasts, but there's way more than you want to listen to. It's like they're coming out of the walls now. Tons of great information. There's so much information available. So that's why I'm so impressed that you came in together in real life and talked to each other and joined us for this discussion, because this doesn't happen very much. Really appreciate it so much. And now, let's hear from Spencer.
Right, thank you. As you just said, my name is Spencer. I'm a member of the Communist Party of the United States of America and the Young Communist League. We've been an organization that has existed for a little over a century now, continuously fighting and struggling for the working class. And if there's one way I can say that the party works with imperialism, is that we try to connect the struggle for working class power here and connect it to the global fight against imperialism abroad, and seeing how capitalism as a global system is capitalism as a global system, you know, takes resources from these, you know, other countries, these peripheral countries, and uses that to exploit workers here. You know, it's a continuous system of cycling profits and violence mainly. That's about it. I'm sorry. It's in the name. We are the communists. I'm sure everybody here is at least somewhat like vaguely familiar with the communists, the Red Scare, just history of the fight of the left in this country. We're a revolutionary Marxist organization. We have been since our founding. There's really not a whole lot else to say other than we fight for the working class, and the working class not just here, but the working class globally.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
You fight for people who aren't working too? You fight for people who are not working, other than those who are just sitting looking at their dividends?
Right, yeah.
All right.
You mean the unemployed people, for example?
Oh, unemployed, retired, all kinds of people. I just don't want the working class to be too limited.
Oh, no, the working class is extremely broad, and I would say it fills in most people, the vast majority of people in our society. The reason that there are so many unemployed people right now has to do with the idea of the reserve army of labor, which is used as a means to exploit other workers. So yes, we fight for the working class as broadly as you can imagine, society like as a whole, except those that, you know, leech and siphon to get their like wealth and power from the rest of us.
I have a couple of questions.
How young do you have to be in the Young Communist League?
Okay, so to answer your question, around 16 for the Young Communist League. The UICL ranges from like 16 to 35 is like the cap for the Young Communist League, but the party, to join the party proper, the youngest age is 18, and that 18 to however old as you want to be, you're never old enough to be a communist.
Okay, so one more question for me. How do you relate the YCL to the CPUSA? How is it connected?
The YCL is the youth branch of the Communist Party. It's a way to, because you have like student workers and younger people who you still live in capitalism, are still exploited under the system, and they still need a voice and a means to organize and get their opinions and expressions out there. So the Young Communist League is an organ for that. It's a way for young people to express their discontent with the system in face issues that specifically younger people face.
I'm curious about the relationship that you have with the Committees of Correspondence, which was once part of the Communist Party. I mean, when the Soviet Union went down, there was all kinds of issues that came up. And I think they send out Portside, portside.org, a lot of interesting, mostly good stuff. What's your relationship with them?
That is a very good question. Personally, I'm a relatively new member to the Communist Party. I joined around a year ago. So as far as like its exact history with the many organizations that it's worked with throughout its like century of struggle and lifetime, I can't necessarily comment on the history and their relationship exactly.
Okay.
The Committees for Correspondence wanted to become more in the orbit of the Democratic Party, take the party into a social democratic type of organizing.
Was Angela Davis with the Committees for Correspondence?
She was one of the figureheads, yeah.
Yes, he's right. It's split the two, and sent, Committees of Correspondence is still around, and they do have a newsletter called Portside, and they put it out regularly. And some of the people who did split from the CPUSA and went to Committees of Correspondence have returned back to the CPUSA. So that split was very disadvantageous to the left at that time. It was around the fall of the Soviet Union, around 89, 90, and communist parties all around the world suffered splits like that. And in the U.S., the party had one side that went with Gorbachev, one that went against Gorbachev, and, those kind of splits. They happen in the left all the time. And that's why we're doing this event specifically, because we have to start forgetting about these splits and start finding common ground. Yes, we know there's a lot of common ground with the people who left or stayed or whatever. And we got to find a way to fight the big power. And if we keep splitting up and talking against each other, we're never going to go nowhere. That's part of the whole plot to really break up the left. So that is the group that you can support. They do a lot of good work, and so does the CPUSA, and so does the YCL. So thank you so much, Spencer, for being here. Let's give these two guys a nice round of applause for their work.
Nice answer, Bill Meyer.
For their words and for their work. Thank you. We're going to move over to Richard Peacock. By the way, these are parties we're talking about here. It wasn't necessarily we wanted parties, but he's talking about the Party for Liberation, the Socialism and Liberation. He's talking about the Communist Party, and eventually Rita will talk about the Green Party. But Peace Action is not a party. It's an organization, and they do a lot of great work. And Richard, you can tell us your title and roll with it, and go with it.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks to everybody for being here on a Sunday afternoon. Your attendance is appreciated. Formally, I'm Reverend Richard Peacock. I prefer Rich, and Rich is good in this setting, so if you have a question or comment for me, please use Rich. I served 5 United Methodist churches for 35 years in metropolitan Detroit, and I'm now retired. Swords and Plowshares is in the Central United Methodist Church building, and that church has a long tradition of peace and justice, including being a pacifist church during the Second World War. So we're in a special place. Martin Luther King Jr. came here to preach annually during Lent. You're on good ground here. That's good. I'm co-chair of Peace Action of Michigan. We have about 1,500 constituents across the state. We are an affiliate of Peace Action with headquarters in outside of Washington, D.C. We claim to be the largest grassroots peace organization with 100,000 members across the country. Here in Michigan, we have 3 primary foci. One is a sustainable economic system, a system that does not overspend on the Pentagon and nuclear weapons, but spends to meet people's needs. The opposite of poverty is justice, and so we seek a just economic system. We seek the abolition of nuclear war weapons and all weapons of mass destruction. We spend far too much money on nuclear weapons, and we want to see that to continue to be reduced. And we support, thirdly, diplomatic solutions to global problems. Bill mentioned one of the quotes, where we're lacking with Ukraine is diplomacy. Everything is a military card. And so, what we have to do is push for rigorous diplomacy. We do an annual Remembering Hiroshima event, and copies of this newsletter are on the back table. That happened just last Thursday night with Jim Ryan, Veterans for Peace. He talked about the fallacy of prepping for nuclear war, but not climate catastrophe. We're just doing the wrong stuff. We have a 501c4, which means that we also have a political arm. We supported for Congress on August Congressman Andy Levin, who unfortunately lost, and we supported Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who won. So we'll be supporting her in November. And we'll also be supporting Dan Kildee, who has a really good record in terms of working on the Flint water pollution, so and in peace stuff. So we'll do our best to get out the vote. We had our biggest success, I would say, in 2015 when we formed a coalition to lobby for the Iran nuclear deal. We had a good group of people, from physics professors to Jewish activists, who lobbied our senators to support the Iran nuclear deal. Every year we do a Peace Builder banquet where we honor peace people. We did a Zoom event last spring with Fran Shore, a retired Wayne State professor, who talked about the dying U.S. empire. We have a website, peaceactionmich.org, which keeps us up to date. I think where we fit in the spectrum here is we do our best to establish relationships with people in Washington, D.C., senators and representatives, their staffers, so that we can push the legislation that we think gets us closer to a world without war, a world without nuclear weapons, and a just economy. So we work, shall we say, within the system, and work on Zoom calls with the staffers of Senators Peters and Stabenow and so forth. So that gives you an idea of what we're about. Peace Action of Michigan.
Richard Peacock, let's give him a nice round of applause. Thank you for being here. I want to mention that it's an organization that you can have any political view that fits in with their mission statement, of course, and there's many chapters across the country, and I happen to know the one in Massachusetts is very active around imperialism, more than the local chapters. Each chapter more or less picks on their issues that they can work with. So Peace Action is wide open, and it needs all the support it can get. So from left, far left, middle left, whatever, anywhere in the left, anybody who agrees on stopping war, and even if you're not anti-capitalist, you could still work with. If you're anti-capitalist, you could still work with Peace Action. I'm on the board, actually. Although I can't make any of the meetings because I work every Thursday night. So, anyways, it's a great group. And now,
Rich, I was just wondering if your group is lobbying currently to renew the Iran nuclear deal, because I know it was canceled out. I was just wondering if there is any, progress being made to renew the Iran nuclear deal.
It does not look as if there's real progress. It seems to be a stalemate. The big issue is identifying the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. We think that, which Trump did, that was wrong, and that should not be a part of the negotiations, and Biden should drop that requirement and hustle and get back into compliance. We communicate with our senators about that. I write letters to the Detroit Free Press, but the mainstream news is not interested in Iran these days. So letters and discussion are not happening. It's very, very disappointing. But Iran is off the table in terms of the public discussion. So all we can do at this point is continue to try to influence the media and to tell our senators, both of whom voted for it, that they need to push Biden to comply again.
So now we're going to move the mic down to our other formidable guest, who I have never met before until today, and we met her because of our own Sherry Wells, who's a member of our Mission Peace Council organization. And thank you, Sherry, for hooking us up. So here's Rita. Rita Jacobs.
For those of you who don't know about the Green Party, it's actually an international party. There are Green parties in several in Europe, in the UK, in Germany, and also other parts of the world. There's one in South Korea that I know of. Anyway, the Green Party of the United States is a coalition of state parties. And right now, I think we have 46 states who are in the coalition. We have a few states that have not joined the Green Party in the United States. And each state, of course, is free to do their own work. We believe in decentralization. They can work on whatever issues that the states want to work on in their own state parties. At the federal level, we have several committees. We have 5 of them that cover issues. And before I get into those, I will mention that the 4 pillars upon which the Green parties are established are grassroots democracy, social justice, ecological wisdom, and peace. And I think most of you know or think of the Green Party as being tree huggers or primarily interested in ecology. However, we do have a full platform that addresses all of the issues that affect the operation of the government, from domestic to foreign and so forth. And peace is one of our main issues. And we have, I think, 4 or 5 issues committees. And one of them is the Peace Action Committee. and that's one that I've been a member of since 2018. And the other committees, one is ecological, I think eco-socialism. The Young Eco-Socialists is one of the, we have an Eco-Action Committee, I'm sorry. And we also have a coalition or a caucus of Young Eco-Socialists. So we have the two things, I'm getting them mixed up here. And then we also have the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, which addresses the need for monetary reform. In respect to what these committees do, the Peace Action Committee has been sponsoring a number of webinars, about 3 or 4 per year in the last couple of years, and basically discussing issues of the day and current issues having to do with peace, depending on what time of year it is and so forth. They are having one to discuss the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and they had to postpone that until next week for some reason. So it will be a webinar with several speakers that will address those issues. The other thing we do, of course, is to ask our members to send letters to the editor of the newspaper, and sometimes we have sample letters for that, and also to lobby their representatives, mainly in Congress, to vote in certain ways on certain issues that come up. With respect to how we deal directly with imperialism, we do have a statement out on imperialism that's on our website, and I think I have a copy on the back table that Sherry Wells kindly printed for me because my printer died yesterday. So, and we also, of course, are looking closely at what's going on with the Ukraine war. And we are asking, or working right now at this time on declaring a peace emergency. We have written a draft of a declaration of peace emergency, which we're asking individuals to sign it. But however, we're going to work with some national peace organizations in joining us in sponsoring this particular action. Similar to what the folks call a climate emergency, we have a peace emergency right now with what's going on in Ukraine, and also the provocation of China that we're going through. In fact, I just read this morning that even Henry Kissinger has come out and said that the U.S. has a reckless policy toward Russia and China right now. So I think that's a little bit scary. And yes, if Kissinger says that, it must be bad. Yes, definitely. So I guess that's about it for covering everything. Okay.
First, does anybody have any questions about the Green Party, Rita? Something you didn't know about or you want to know about? I have a question. Did it start in Germany?
I'm not sure. Okay, I've only been a member since 2015. I know that there have been some members in the U.S. who have been members of the Green Party since 1980. So,
just like Peace Action and like Green Party, each chapter or each country sort of has a different platform or different program.
yes, they do. Okay, and yes, they do have different programs. Right now, we're a little upset with the German Green Party. They seem to be heading toward the right. They're supporting NATO and all these NATO actions and so on. And as far as our Peace Action Committee is concerned, we think NATO should be dismantled.
Just Just a side note, we had an election here for president a few years ago, and John Mubaraka was a candidate for the Green Party, who was a good guy, and he's actually on the board of the U.S. Peace Council. So we love him. And Jill Stein was the candidate for president. Had a big rally downtown at Bert's Place. That was a lot of fun. Yes. So that's an introduction to the four groups. Are there any questions before we go on? Okay, part two. This is going to be about definitions, and this is the hardest part. We all pretty much know what our groups are. That's pretty easy. But now we're going to talk about definitions, which, I've spent my life trying to define some of these terms. Capitalism, communism, socialism, nationalism, colonialism, imperialism. So we're going to try to clarify it a little bit here. There's no solid answer I don't think we're going to come up with, but we want you guys to help. So before we do it, I got two quotes, two recordings I want to play for you from two individuals who are talking about imperialism. This will take about 5 minutes. First quote's about 2.5 minutes long. It's from a guy named Caleb Maupin. I don't know if any of you know who that is. He's, I think he used to be with Workers' World Party, and now he started the Center for Political Innovation, CPI, I think it's called. And he's also a journalist for RT News. So that's every reason why you shouldn't believe anything he says. That's a joke, folks. Okay, so right.
A disinformation terrorist.
Yeah, disinformation terrorist. Okay, so here's Caleb speaking about imperialism.
So when we talk about the imperialists, what does that mean? What does it mean when we talk about the imperialists? A lot of people think that means people who believe in war a lot. No. People think that we mean military people who are really excited about military interventions, or people who want to go take over countries, they want to build an empire. Well, no, imperialism is an economic thing. It is an economic concept that comes out of Lenin. He wrote a book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where he talked about how finance capital, bankers, move into a dominant position over industrial capital, and that the bankers sit at the center of networks of trusts, cartels, and syndicates, and that these ultra monopolies that don't just make profits, they make super profits by subjecting the developing countries of Africa and Asia and Latin America to super exploitation. These ultra monopolists, these ultra rich with their trusts, their cartels, their syndicates, these finance capitalists, they sit at the center of a global financial empire. And this global financial empire that they sit at the center of, this empire holds back economic development, prevents entire nations from lifting themselves up from poverty. It keeps countries impoverished as captive client states. It beats down entire countries. This is imperialism. This is Lenin's understanding of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Capitalism in its monopolistic stage, where governments and banks and cartels and monopolies, industrial monopolies in the Western countries team up into gigantic entities that beat down entire countries. We're talking about the World Bank. We're talking about the International Monetary Fund. We're talking about the World Trade Organization. We are talking about BlackRock. We're talking about Goldman Sachs. We are talking about ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, the ultra monopolies. That is who the imperialists are in this global system where they sit at the center of it, driving down living standards, trying to keep the world poor so that they can stay rich. That is what imperialism is.
So that's Caleb Maupin. I have another quote from one other person to start the discussion. Her name is Caitlin Johnstone. Some of you may read her very lucid writings quite regularly, almost daily. She has a website called Caitlin Johnstone, Caitlin Johnstone. And she's got a tremendous wit. Great artist. She also writes lyrics, songs, and music, and she's quite a Here's a quote Here's her reading one of her latest presentations. It's about a minute and a half long.
The US empire is able to dominate the world exactly because it has the will to do what the other guy wouldn't. Whenever I lay out my evidence that the US is the most tyrannical regime on earth, I'll get someone conceding that this is true, but arguing that the US only behaves that way because it is the most powerful. Any other government with the power of the United States would behave with the same amount of viciousness or worse, they argue. And I always tell them that they've got it exactly backwards. The US isn't uniquely vicious because it's the world's most powerful government. The US is the world's most powerful government because it is uniquely vicious. The United States put an exclamation point at the end of the Second World War by dropping 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, not because it needed to, it didn't, but because it wanted to intimidate the Soviet Union. It then immediately launched into a succession of new wars and strategic operations of astonishing viciousness, with the goal of eventually becoming the global dominator. It achieved this at the fall of the USSR, after which it immediately instituted a policy of working to ensure that no rival superpowers ever develop, and began working toward full spectrum dominance of the land, sea, air, and space. All of the major international conflicts of our day are the direct result of these policies.
That was Caitlin Johnstone. So that's just a little bit of her writing. You might want to check her out. She's quite brilliant. So as we sit here dealing with the daily problems of trying to find a job, trying to pay the bills, prices going up, racism, ecology, the climate change, all these problems we have. While this is all going on, this powerful force is continuing to control the world and profits. We don't care about that. We don't notice it. It doesn't happen to us, except we're feeling it, and it's not designed. It's not defined clearly enough or analyzed close enough. And that's why I'm hoping that this discussion of imperialism will help us to see exactly what the most powerful forces are that are creating the conditions we live in. Yes, we live in one of the greatest countries in the world. I've always said that all my life, but I know why. Because we were ripped off the rest of the world. That's why we live here. And it's so beautiful. I learned that long ago when I was a kid. I have comforts, and a white male is even more comfortable because of what our imperialist policies have done to the rest of the world. Just go around the world to some of these countries where millions and millions of people are victims of our wars. If you look on the wall and you see these posters that we put up, there's lists of them. I mean, we've been in more than 50 wars since World War II. And before that, even more. So, I mean, that's how we encourage, that's how we develop imperialism. Through war is one way. And we don't care as long as people profit that need to be profited and the rest of us pay the price. But we're way above every other country because of our standard of living. But, you know, you see what's happening. It's going down. It's going down. China's going up. And now there's a real threat. And now we're in more serious trouble because who knows what the imperialist powers are going to do. Create war, nuclear war, who knows? What are they going to do to hang on to world global hegemony? We've got to wake up as soon as possible and realize that imperialism is a serious issue that we have to deal with. So, the terminology, we just heard a couple of people talk about imperialism. The U.S. Peace Council doesn't usually use the term imperialism, doesn't go at it that way. It just defines the right of nations to have their own right to exist, sovereign rights, and we're against war, and we are against exploitation of labor and all that sort of stuff. That is imperialism, but we don't necessarily use that term. So I want to ask the 4 guests here if you can try to help talk about any of these terms that some of us had confusion with: nationalism versus imperialism, colonialism versus imperialism, and even communism versus socialism. I mean, there's all these terms that we all pass around. There's a lot of them. There's no way we're going to solve the problem today. But our guests in the audience, if you have anything to add to this, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll go around with the mic and add if you have any questions about what any one of us say here. We want to try to get a clearer understanding of imperialism first and then anything else related to it. It's a tough subject, so, define love, define racism, define, there's a lot of terms that you can, but I think imperialism, as Caleb said, is pretty clear that it's an economic control more than anything else, financial control of the markets. But Lenin wrote a lot of stuff about that, and maybe somebody here would like to start the discussion and add to it.
So the question of imperialism, it is an economic model. It's to be as simple as I can with it, the merger of industrial and finance capital to exercise power outside of their national state boundaries in the search of a cheaper labor force and to gain resources from these militarily weaker countries. And it did very much so spawn out of colonialism. It's a different concept, but something that's very, very connected and similar. The idea of going to another nation, and rather than what we saw in the conquest of the New World and replacing and genociding its native population, we go to these other countries in Southeast Asia and Africa and set up puppet regimes to take their resources from the rightful people who live there to make to define super profits in the imperial core in the nations of Western Europe, the United States, and so on. Would anyone else like to elaborate on this?
There we go. Yeah, just to kind of build off of that too, in terms of some of the other definitions, things like nationalism versus imperialism, as the BSL is firmly in the ground of the right of nations to self-determination, it is important to make a distinction between, the sort of nationalism that we see here in the United States, that is the largest perpetrator of imperialism as an economic model, versus the struggles of countries like Vietnam for their national liberation. Because we support worker states, national liberation struggles all across the world, because they are fighting against imperialism. They're fighting against the exploitation of their people and their systems. And to really also build off of that, it's gone through some evolutions over the last century. We saw the world wars where they wanted to redivide the world, just individually fighting each other, US, France, Germany, Japan. Then you've got the global class war where they're really just fighting together. The once enemies after World War II all got together and said, we need to take down the socialist projects, building up the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, Cuba. And now they exercise it not so much as a form of actually holding on to territories, but as what Kwame Nkrumah said, neocolonialism. They can still have that power over countries. They can still exert imperialism by having that merger, like Spencer was talking about, between finance capital and productive capital, where they simply just control their economy. And if a government doesn't want to do what they say what the US or the EU says, they'll just violently overthrow their government. So yeah, that's what I've got to add.
Right. Thank you.
There's different kinds of nationalism. There's not only one kind of nationalism. There's justified nationalism. So in a sense, when you ask the question, is war ever justified? Is violence ever justified? That's a tough question to answer because, yeah, if you've got someone with their foot on top of you and you're going to die if you don't fight back, that's violence when you fight back. That's what the U.S. uses as a tactic. That's how they've started a lot of wars. The Korean War started that way. Many wars started that way. That's how they do it. One of the tactics, they antagonize the other person like the bully in the schoolyard. I dare you to hit me. I dare you to hit me. Come on, touch me, hit me. And then the guy finally says, okay, and he hits you, and then now you pound the shit out of the guy. That's how U.S. empire works. They wait for the other guy to attack. Same with Russia, same with the same thing that happened in Ukraine. NATO just pushed them to the door, and then Russia finally acts, and now Russia's the enemy. And now China's the enemy because of the whatever we can find. So there's justified war, there's justified violence to end violence. If that sounds logical enough, I mean, I'm still having a moral problem with this issue. I don't like violence of any kind. But sometimes you have to fight to save yourself and save your people and get out of a mess and then stop violence from there on.
We've heard about imperialism with economic root and the political root. I want to talk about imperialism with its religious root. I go back to President Woodrow Wilson. America was born a Christian nation for the purpose of exemplifying to the nations of the world the principles of righteousness found in the Word of God. So we have a history of being a white, righteous Christian nation. One of my textbooks 50 years ago was entitled The Righteous Empire, Church History, The Righteous Empire. Billy Graham certainly subscribed to that as a righteous, the United States as a righteous empire. So we have this a long string. And it goes back even more into history. I would say from a religious aspect, the American empire is rooted in the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery, which came from the popes in the 1400s. And the doctrine of discovery gave permission for the Portuguese and the Spanish to colonize the whole world on behalf of Roman Catholicism. The whole world was to be subjected to Rome. And one of those people who did that, worked on that, was Columbus. He came here with the justification of the doctrine of discovery. So with the doctrine of discovery, you could convert, you could become a slave, you could be killed, or you could be violently dominated by political and economic means. Those were the choices of the doctrine of discovery foisted upon people in North America, Central America, and beyond. Let me tackle imperialism or the American empire from one other religious angle. I personally think that Martin Luther King was a liberation theologian and one of the greatest moral thinkers and practitioners in the 20th century. And he identified the three great giants of racism, militarism, and materialism. That's what we face. Racism, militarism, materialism, I would define as working inequality. And in his famous speech about getting out of Vietnam, exactly 1 year before he was assassinated, he called the United States, quote, "the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today," unquote. So I think if you're going to look at imperialism and empire, one needs to look at the religious roots from doctrine of discovery, from our various presidents, from our religious leaders, and from the church. It's a big root with serious consequences. Rita, do you want to add something?
What I wanted to add is the references here to the control by the banks and the financial institutions and so forth. Back in as far back as the 18th, 19th century, we had banks who were much in control of the money situation, creating their own money and loaning it out and so forth. And they were able to acquire a lot of control of the largest corporations. And this was so even before the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was passed. And that basically legalized the right of banks to create money. And right now the banks create 97% of the money that enters into the economy, and they do this by creating loans. So all of the money that is put into circulation is the result of somebody borrowing money. So we call this a debt-based system. And over the years, over the last 100 years or so, with this type of thing going on, and not enough money is ever created for everybody to pay the interest that they owe on these loans. And that's why the debt keeps building up and up and up and never gets paid off. And right now, for any of you who pay attention, the government, the national debt right now is up beyond $30 trillion. And it will never get paid off. And we don't know exactly what's going to happen, how that's going to come out, so we're expecting some kind of a big economic collapse or whatever, because everybody is in debt, including the government, and Congress won't do anything about it. Our Banking and Monetary Reform Committee has established a platform of the Green Party where we have proposed that we nationalize the banks, the Federal Reserve banks. They are right now all private institutions. They are not a division of the U.S. government. They're not responsible to the U.S. government. And we need to have a government that will create its own money, debt-free, and actually the Constitution gave that power to Congress. Gave Congress the power to create money. And they passed that right and privilege onto the banks, and it's had very serious consequences. I might add, the banks were so much in control of money way back in shortly before World War I. J.P. Morgan, who was one of the wealthiest bankers at the time, had somebody study all the newspapers in the country to see which were most influential. And he bought up 25 of the most influential newspapers in the country so that the banks could mold the attitude and thinking of the people regarding the news and so on. They did that in order to create public approval of entering the war, the First World War. The reason that they wanted to enter the war is because it's extremely profitable for the bankers. They can sell weapons to both sides of the fighting and so forth, and they did that too. So they have been controlling things for a long time. And they are most in control. Right now, the Federal Reserve of New York pretty much has control over the Bank for International Settlements, and that's a bank located in Switzerland that changes money for all the countries who are doing international trade. So when the U.S. imposes sanctions on certain countries, they enforce that by way of not allowing those countries to change their money into foreign currency and so forth. That's how they how they control that. Anyway, I think that the banking problem is one of the greatest causes of all the militarism because there's nothing that the bankers care about except profits.
Yes, thank you. That was great. Thank you for your comments. Audience, yes, please, if you have questions, one here, and then Ken's going to be next. Go ahead,
When
Sharon.
you mentioned about the United States provoking, we have a recent example called Pelosi.
Yes, Pelosi. Yes, that's a fine example of provoking war.
So banks create loans out of nothing. So you studied Richard Werner. He demonstrated that empirically, that loans create money out of nothing. So Richard Werner is real important. The Princes of the Yen. Doctrine of discovery and conquest was 1493, tied right in with Columbus. And it goes back, cowboys and Indians. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz wrote that, Cowboys and Indians. It's a short thing. It goes into the purity of blood of the Inquisitions and the Reconquista of Spain against the Moors. The purity of blood became the basis for supremacism. So every kind of supremacism that you see in the world today, we have the right to be the rulers because we're the superior ones. Every time you see that, it comes from the purity of blood that goes back to the inquest. To say that you're actually equal human beings is a revolutionary thing because we're so inbred with get into the middle class so you can be one of the superior people, you know? So I'm a European peasant that made it into the working class, and I aimed for the middle class, and I couldn't make it, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I want to talk about imperialism, and that book, Imperialism, High-Stage Capitalism, written during World War I, is more or less required reading if you want to understand imperialism. And it was, as you were saying, the merger of industrial and financial capital. The domination of financial capital over capital would be neoliberal imperialism. And that term became popular when the Soviet Union went down and imperialism took a whole leap forward, the financialization of everything. I never heard of hedge funds back then. So I think we need to understand neoliberal imperialism. And it was young people in the 90s, Battle of Seattle, and big conferences in Cuba, the whole world's talking about neoliberal imperialism. So the financialization of everything, in which you can destroy capital and make money.
All right, that's Ken Parks, ladies and gentlemen. Ken's was very active for a long time, and has been gone for a while, so he just returned. It's so nice to see you back here with us, Ken. And Ken is very active around the solidarity with Cuba.
I have a home in Cuba, I'm living in Ann Arbor, and my heart's in Detroit.
Yes. And he always has great ideas. Thank you so much for being here. Actually, you should be a guest next time we do this, so you can have a chance to talk a little longer. So we're going to conclude the questions here, and then we'll open it up for the audience points of view. The third area of discussion is going to be around what to do, what is to be done. Someone write a book named that?
Yeah.
Okay, what is to be done? Okay, another Lennon book. And that's not John Lennon, okay. So we're going to read something here from Lennon before we do this third section. It's from 1920. He wrote, "World imperialism shall fall." We're talking about how we're going to change this. How is things eventually going to change? Is imperialism a natural stage, which is more or less what he decides, what he defines, and scientifically proves that this is a natural stage of capitalism. It's going to burn itself out. How it goes down, we don't know. It's going to eventually go. But he says, world imperialism shall fall when the revolutionary onslaught of the exploited and the oppressed workers in each country, overcoming resistance from petty bourgeois elements and the influence of the small upper crust of labor aristocrats, merges with the revolutionary onslaught of hundreds of millions of people who have hitherto stood beyond the pale of history and have been regarded merely as the objects of history. It's the people who will change it, who will fight, and eventually change the system, hopefully for a better world for all of us. Of course, we also know some concrete things that are happening that should be considered as probably two pushing points that are going to push real fast. One is the de-dollarization. U.S. dollar is declining. It's beginning its descent. Countries are now trading in, not trading in U.S. dollars. This is a major change. China, Russia, Iran are all making deals. There's also many new economic and military alliances that are being formed, blocs that are competing with NATO in the West. You know, you all know about BRICS and all the other ones that are SCO and the Road Belt Initiative, all sorts of great things happening in the world, and all we're hearing about is U.S. power taking over the world. There's the rest of the world is going full blast forward to help solve the problems. We're just in the middle of the belly of the beast. So hopefully we can find a way to help this movement, and I want to ask our guests to speak about that.
Thank you, Bill. One concrete movement is Black Lives Matter. And Shirley Chalmers is here. Shirley, raise your hand. Shirley's a part of the Huntington Woods Peace Group. And the Huntington Woods Peace Group, every Monday, 5:30 to 6:30, honk for Black Lives Matter at 11 Mile and Woodward. You're all invited. It is a small but significant thing to do, and we're always surprised by the good number of horn honks we get. Black Lives Matter, honk for Black Lives Matter, Mondays 5:30 to 6:30, 11 Mile and Woodward, out in Royal Oak. That's a concrete, little, but significant step, I think.
Yes, and
Thank you, Rich. And I want to mention that some of our guests and others have brought literature for you to look at on the tables. You know, I remember all the events I've gone to, and I didn't know the people, and I just take everything, just take it home, and then read it when I get home. And man, there's some really good stuff. Sometimes it was like, are you crazy or something? But you don't have time to read it. But take the literature home and learn about these other groups and learn what you have in common, how we can work together, because they all have some good things. I just read the CPUSA article by Joel Wendland, an old friend of mine, and a very great article on imperialism and the idea of contradictions in society and what causes imperialism to do what it's doing. So that's out there to read. Every group that's here brought some literature. Respect them, read their literature, talk to them when this event's over. If anyone would like to address this question on the panel here about where do you think we're going to go with getting rid of imperialism or fighting it? It's unite against imperialism. So what does that mean? What are we going to do? What are your groups going to do? What do you think we should do? I just mentioned a couple of concrete things that are happening. De-dollarization and military and economic blocks by other countries. So I mean, there's stuff we can do here locally, individuals, but obviously it takes big forces like countries to make major changes, but let's see what we got here.
Hi, yeah. When asking the question of what is to be done in the face of imperialism, it can be a very big and harrowing thing. And we are talking about global systems, the huge empires and countries, and what they do with other countries, and we are all just individual people. It seems like very small, and that is why the idea of collectivization and joining groups and organizations and coming together to at first talk about these and then talk about these things and organize against them is so important, because with imperialism it is linked with capitalism. You can't have one without the other, and capitalism has very organic moments of crises that happen time and time again, and they will continue to happen in the future. One of these crises, which is a very big and historically destructive one, is the tendency for capitalist imperialists in different countries to compete with each other, and that competition usually ends up with war. You have the First World War, that was essentially a competition between German imperialism, rising German imperialism, and the status quo of the Anglo-French domination of the world. World War II was once again, German imperialism, but this time is focused on the vast swaths of Eastern Europe. Every time the capitalists fight for resources, you get these big booms of pain and suffering, and then in every instance in the aftermath of that it shocks the system, makes everything very uneasy, and in those moments of unease and contradiction, that's when groups, first, for example, in Soviet Russia, or in the Russian Empire at the time, they organized and they established the first socialist project to be able to provide a viable alternative to capitalist imperialism. And if, God forbid, with what the United States is doing in Russia, with Russia and Ukraine today, or with Taiwan and China, that there is another break like that, another situation where there's crisis and doubt in the system, that is a place for organizations to fill in the spot, to unite against imperialism and to unite against capitalism. These revolutionary moments come organically, and they have come organically, and they will come organically, but revolutions themselves are man-made, and that's the importance of the people in this room and the people out there to, fight against that.
Yeah, just to build a little bit off of what Spencer has been saying, that's one of the most important things, to actually take on imperialism. It is an inherent feature of capitalism. It won't just go away through some nice reforms or whether we elect some Democrats or Republicans. We need people to join revolutionary organizations to actually take on the tasks of, building up those conditions for the eventual replacement of capitalism with socialism. Because it will continue until we do something about it. And we won't know when those revolutionary conditions will take place. But what we can do is lay the groundwork for them to take advantage of it. And especially like here in our local areas, ultimately it's not just a fight against militarism or war. We really have to be building connections here in the local communities, around the country and around the world, showing solidarity with those like Cuba, Vietnam, China, that are resisting U.S. imperialism. Because without that, without raising socialism as the only solution to imperialism, we won't be able to overcome it. The system will eventually lead us to nuclear annihilation or just the same old, same old. Yeah.
Okay. Audience? Okay, the mic's going around.
Hey, I just had a quick question about what you were saying, Mitchell. It sounded like you were speaking on like some level of inevitability of U.S. imperialism. Could you speak a little bit about the relationship between the United States and imperialism and sort of maybe like the evolution of where it has gone from its origins to today?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk a little bit about that. Like Rayburn Peacock was talking about, starting back with that doctrine of discovery. Fortunately, as a law student, I got to learn quite a bit about how the government began justifying its conquest. And so it was that idea that you go and destroy the indigenous communities, make room for the resources, enslave them, take their resources. And slowly over history, beginning with that, overt colonialism all across Asia, Latin America, Africa, and up to this point, we saw it with the world wars just openly going through very pointless deaths of millions and millions, and even up through today with the downfall of the Soviet Union, there is no major competitor to the U.S. As much as our elite try to talk about China as being a competitor, they're still building up their society, they're still building up their economy. And it gets into that inevitable aspect because these are forces greater than any one individual. Why, it can be any number of presidents or individuals running banks, corporations that, it's that pursuit of profit that leads them to these disastrous effects. Why we see provocations of China with Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, or why we see the funneling of billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine, not because they care about Ukraine, but because they want Russia to fall so that they can get those resources. So, even though it is an inevitability, we don't know what conditions will result in it, but best be sure that eventually, as living conditions here in the U.S. continue to decline, and in Europe, the imperialists will seek another war, another world war.
Question? Up front here, Cameron?
I especially want to answer that.
Oh, I was going to answer this too, but go ahead.
Just wanted to add on to something that Mitchell said. When speaking of, because we keep talking about American imperialism specifically because they are the #1 top dog in the entire world, but it's important to note that it's not that the American government is uniquely evil or uniquely vicious or anything like that, because then the question becomes, okay, then maybe the U.S.'s prominence in the world stage should be limited and that should be the solution. But no, capitalism is the basis here. It's the system itself. Before the United States, you had Anglo-French domination of the world, Western Europe as a whole. It's these systems in place which make imperialism a rational response, and that's why socialism is the answer. Changing the basis of a country and its economy and how it runs is how you end imperialism, not just facing one government and saying, oh, that government should be overthrown or changed with so on and so forth. I think the focus on the American government specifically is another aspect of American exceptionalism and rejecting that there are material realities which give these capitalists their justification for doing these gross atrocities. And it's important to remember that as well.
Yes, hello. My name is David Smokler. I'm from the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, and we participated in the first gathering of this group. I just want to say that after World War II, a new international order was started in some respects. The United Nations was founded. International law was based upon the founding of the United Nations. And today we hear a lot about the rules-based order that the Americans are promulgating and that the Europeans and their lackeys are promoting. And that is rules that are made by the United States. International law is going by the boards. What does that mean? It means that, for example, the Bank of England can just refuse to give Venezuela its gold. Or Afghanistan, they seize their assets. Russia, because these are the rules. Sanctions are only legal if sanctions are only legal if they are sanctioned by the United Nations. But the United States now is sanctioning some 54 countries. What does that mean? It means they make up their own rules. You can't trade with this country, you can't do this, you can't do that. And other countries are afraid not to follow the United States' sanctions. Now this rules-based order and these sanctions have now come home. For example, I saw a report from a British reporter in Donbass. You may have seen this. I forgot his name. But he was reporting on the truth of what was going on in Donbass. What did the British do? They sanctioned him. They seized his bank accounts. They seized his passport. He became a non-entity.
Yeah, no, I think that I really appreciate all the remarks that everyone's made today, but I think sometimes in these conversations I can end up a little bit unsatisfied because I think we end up straying into very comfortable territory of facts and figures and sort of I think a correct argument that imperialism is wrong and has historically resulted in a lot of cruelty and harm. But I think I'd like to hear from the panelists, and I'd like for other folks to think about this too, how do we make these issues more real to people outside of this room and more real to the people in our lives? I think sometimes the way we encourage folks to think about imperialism is to go read 6 books on Syria and then to make a long comment or argue that we shouldn't intervene in Syria. But how does that relate to Detroit? How does that relate to where resources are spent in our communities? How does that relate to somebody's day-to-day? I think we often drop the ball on that one. I'd like to hear like examples of how folks, I think people in this room are doing that work, so I'd love to hear like how do you make these issues beyond an academic debate or beyond a correct position, but yeah. But yeah, how do you really bring that home to folks who aren't already all the way bought in? So thanks.
Right, yeah, that is a really good question. My response to that is simply making the connection to people, like through organizations within the community, mutual aid-based organizations, other organs of civil society such as churches and places where people come together to experience and live in their community. Just kind of making the connection between, why, for Detroit, in example, the DPS system is so terrible. Why are there so many abandoned houses when, there's a homeless crisis? Like, where's all the money going? It's going to fund these imperialist ventures abroad. It's going to the F-35 plane, which doesn't even work. Billions of dollars to these projects when we have that money could be used in Detroit, for example. Thousands of teachers could be hired. You could have better school equipment and so on and so forth. And just making the connection between, yes, like imperialism does not just harm people abroad, it harms people here as well. And you get that message across by, joining these organizations, going to the churches and these other organizations and working with these people, because people, they want to see their city and their lives. They want the material conditions that they live in to get better, So, they start to ask these questions of where's the money going? Why can't I afford this? Why do I have to, if I get hit by a car, pay $2,000 just to get to the hospital? You start making them ask these questions, and you start building a sense of solidarity with the fact that people are getting bombed over in a country that most people can't even point on a map, and the fact that you can't afford to feed your kids anymore. And that's where you start to have that conversation and bridge that connection and take it out of the academic sphere. Would anyone like to add to that?
I'm going to have to excuse myself. Yes.
Yes, I know Richard had to leave at 3:30, so he's going to go. You want to say something before you go? No, you're all done.
Vocabulary is important. I have 3 words that I like to use: shalom, salam, shante. The religions need to get together, and we have a vocabulary which I recommend to all of you. Thank you. You've been really attentive. That's just wonderful. So I'm going to...
We appreciate your appearance. Thank you so much, Richard. I'm going to turn the microphone over to our co-chair of Michigan Peace Council, and she's going to continue on with the questions and comments from the audience, and I know Dave has the rest of his comments to say. So let's welcome Linda Rayburn. Come on up, Linda.
Again, hello. My name is Linda Rayburn. I'm glad to be here. I'm the co-chair of the Michigan Peace Council. So let's continue, shall we?
Hello. So I wanted to bring up the African People's Socialist Party. Have people heard what happened to them?
Yeah, I heard.
Yeah. They're located in St. Louis, Missouri, and in St. Petersburg, Florida. They've been around for, I guess, 50 years. They're a nationalist and anti-imperialist organization. And apparently their leader went to a conference in Russia dealing with anti-globalization. Now the U.S. has indicted the leader of that anti-globalization group. I don't know, he's a Russian citizen, he lives in Russia. This is what we're talking about, a rules-based order. And they've claimed that this group in the United States are unindicted co-conspirators. So the other day, they at 5 o'clock in the morning, they set off a big loudspeaker, "Come out of the house." So the come out with your hands up. The leader came out with his hands up, with red dots shining on his chest. They put zip tie around his hands and asked him to sit on the curb. He refused to do that. Then his wife came out, and as she came out of the house, a drone flew by her ear and went up the stairs in the house. They handcuffed her. Well, why? Well, they had a search warrant, and they took out all their computers, all their cell phones, all their archives after 50 years of study. They have connections all around the world, this group, and claimed they were unindicted co-conspirators disseminating Russian disinformation. Now, I don't know what law says you can't put forward a different narrative than what the mainstream is putting forward, but you know that they've been shutting down websites, deplatforming opposition groups, closing down PayPal so they can't be financed, and now they have physically attacked this anti-imperialist group in St. Louis, Missouri, and in St. Petersburg, Florida. So what I'm suggesting is, since we are a group of anti-imperialist organizations, that we consider supporting this group, writing a letter or doing something, because they're coming after them now, but it's just the beginning. And they don't, it's even worse than the McCarthy period. At least during the McCarthy period, they had congressional hearings, they subpoenaed you, etc. Here, they ignore the law. They make up these things. Russian disinformation. The reporter in England said the Magna Carta is now dead. 1215, the Magna Carta, it's now dead. There's no due process. They've just taken away my identity, taken away everything. This is what their new tactic is. And this is the first group, an African nationalist, anti-imperialist group, that they've done this to. You can bet they're going to be coming after other groups. They're going to be coming after groups like we belong to. So I think we have to stand shoulder to shoulder, and our groups need to consider making some kind of showing of support, either individually or collectively, to support the African People's Socialist Party. Our group is going to be having discussions about that this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I think that the end point of what you were talking about is very important, because, you know, solidarity between groups of not just groups of anti-imperialist measures, but of all groups that, you know, working class and community-based organizations. That's how you fight this process, right? For example, with unions, right? One might think, what do unions have to do with the struggle of anti-imperialism? But there still is production that's done in the United States here, and let's say if you have a very strong and a very radical and very directly union movement, you can pull off a nationwide strike and shut down the machines of war, and and directly attack the means of imperialism and the methods that we use to exploit all these other countries abroad. So I think at the end of the day, this solidarity with these other groups is the most important, is a very important aspect of anti-imperialist work, but as one section, but in the fight for socialism and liberation of all people as a whole, solidarity is a very important aspect.
Yeah, thanks for that, Spencer. The PSL's issued a statement in support of the African People's Socialist Party and the attacks unwarranted by the FBI. And, if we look back as part of the larger project here in the United States, in terms of, federal repression of groups that pose a threat to the system, we can see with the counterintelligence program where they decapitated organizations by murdering leaders in cold blood, firebombing apartment buildings, supporting the Ku Klux Klan while attacking left-wing organizations. And it never died with the Church Committee in the mid-'70s. It's just continued in a more less obvious way, but as capitalism continues to decay and is scrambling to continue trying to get on its feet, we continue to see repression like this, and it is true, we have to stand in solidarity with each other when there are things like this, because we never know when the state apparatus is going to ratchet it up. And that's why they still, keep political prisoners in prison, like Dr. Matulu Shakur, who's still being denied compassionate release, and why they're arresting people up to this day and carrying out attacks like that.
As Rita said, I was privileged to print out the two handouts that are on the back table. Both of them are actions positions that the Green Party is taking on Ukraine and the other one on the emergency. One is the national emergency draft, and the other one is the Ukraine issues, and both of those are ones that we can all sign on to. If you want anything more about the Green Party's very simple website, www.gp.org or www.gpus, as in Green Party United States.org, and find out a whole lot more. But please take those handouts, read them, and let's do something with them.
Thank you for that. So does anyone else have any questions or comments?
There's an amazing assembly of like-mindedness here, in which we know we don't have to agree with each other on everything. I've said it before, if I can agree with somebody on 10%, we're starting there, you know?
Thanks again for being here. Well, before we end, actually, I wanted to bring up what someone brought up regarding how do we reach others. As we can see in this room, I see a lot of familiar faces. And that's been, I guess, the fight for a long time. How do you reach average working people on a daily that feel like they don't have time about these issues? And I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes and get people's inputs or what you're doing at this time to reach others or to even keep yourself in the loop of what's going on. So does anyone want to discuss that at this time? Because I feel like it's a more difficult question, right? It really is. We can have panels all we want, day in and day out, but what are we actively doing to also reach our friends and family, or more so just the people on the street, people we see on a daily?
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a really important question. And you know, I know a few organizations like the YCL, CPUSA, PSL, particularly at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we were thinking about this question very seriously. How do we get involved and raise this to other people besides ourselves? Because sometimes it is just the same circles of people. And you know, it's always great to have a panel like this, but we really do need to get out there in our communities. And it's, you know, having conversations with our friends and family, going out all together, doing some outreach in the streets or with various organizations to raise this. Or, you know, having educational sessions on the history of particular events, the history of imperialism, or a lot of other things, because we can see it, especially here, the effects of imperialism in Detroit, where, you know, they spend $60 billion a year maintaining nuclear weapons, but, you know, they could feed all the people going hungry, the people without homes, or repair all of the deteriorated infrastructure instead of doing just these small little things. So I think it is having those conversations, getting involved, and, you know, really all of the organizations that have been part of this conversation, the past and the future ones, you know, continuing to get together and struggle together on points that we can agree on.
Like as far as getting people on board, like we all pointed out, like, you know, like right here we're privileged to have a lot of like-minded people here, but I mean, for me at least, that's usually not the case. Like I organize at UPS, everyone in that building is, you know, moderate Democrat or Trump supporter. Those are the people, those are the working people, but that's labor. Most places, in this area at least. So how do we get those people? That's what you're gonna need, right? We're not gonna. I mean, this is great, but this is just, you know, everyone here already agrees. But for me, is, you know, it's changing that consciousness at the workplace. You know, I'm Teamster Union, very corporatized union, right? Challenging the logic of UPS management, right? Challenging the logic of our you know, flawed union, right? Showing them that they do deserve higher wages, they do deserve more benefits, they don't deserve harassment, right? That social, that conscious shift that we're working towards, that, you know, imagining a better work environment. I guess I gotta start there, right? seeing how, you know, those corporate forces such as UPS that are embedded with imperialism, how those are the enemy, right? So it sounds small, but it's that, you know, it's that conscious shift and that social shift that needs to happen at the workplace to see where the true interests are aligned, and not with, you know, with a Trump or with the UPS or with, you know, with the current, you know, regime, I guess.
I want to kind of build off what my union brother over there was saying, because I think at the workplace, you're right, that in my opinion is where it starts, and we got to start thinking about tactics and how we get people in motion, and once they're in motion, how do we get them to move and progress forward and kind of unite them around their mutual self-interest, like you said, better working conditions, this and that, and then finding a clear line of who the enemy actually is, because it's not like in America we think like right and left and all this, but no, it's deeper than that, you know what I'm saying? So it's just, I don't know if I have the answer, but I do know it lies in people being in motion and people being united.
I have a feeling mine will be the least satisfying answer here, probably, but to do what Josh was talking about is of underestimated importance, and just sticking with it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is let people within the workplace or your family who are not on board, or to whom what you're saying seems foreign, is to let them know that they have a safe place to talk about this when things really start to hit home, and be patient and stay active, but you know, be that source of information in between events like these. It's one of the most important things you can do in your day-to-day life.
Just to build off what a lot of people are saying, I think the thing I've been thinking about recently is the word solidarity is thrown out a lot, and I have often thought about it in like a one-directional, how do I build solidarity with other individual? Is this sort of like single direction thing? And I think the thing I'm trying to meditate on more now is cultivating solidarity, like actually building the energy of solidarity, not just from myself to other, but actually like facilitating solidarity to be built out of others to others. So like really kind of multiplying solidarity concepts. So I think like the deprogramming aspect is huge, but that's a process, and we're all subjects of US propaganda. Every single person in this room has something of US propaganda holding them back from being the thing that we're all talking about right now. That's fine. But without solidarity, it really doesn't matter where we're at in this journey. So I think like simple things like we were talking about with money, 51% of your taxes going to war as opposed to your community. Great conversation. I also think thinking about like, what does it mean to be like a globalized, citizen's the wrong word, but like a globalized self, like having solidarity with a worker in another place, not identifying as a United States citizen in a limited sense, but identifying something so much more. So the next word I started to think about is like, why are we all in these rooms together over and over and over, getting to this point in the conversation, and we celebrate this thing that we're all talking about, we kind of stop there. It's because I don't think we've been able to cultivate the correct relationship. We know how to be friends, we know how to be lovers, we know how to be family members, we know how to be coworkers, we know how to do all these other relationships. But we're talking about a political relationship, something that is different than all of those, transcends all of those. So I've been starting to meditate on that, cultivating solidarity, and what is the working relationship we need for political change, and what does it look like? Because I think we've been all specifically robbed of understanding how that works on purpose, and so we have to fight together to sort of figure out what that looks like. So
I just want to say it's like trust your own instincts, you know, and go with your commitment to your own positive ideology. And then allow that to permeate who you are and become part of your talent, your speech, your everyday life, how you function, and that will be how you continue. Just continuously recommit yourself to your belief system. Thanks.
I write for Ground Cover News in Ann Arbor, and I just submitted an article that I think is going to be published September 1st titled Labor Day, and in it I'm partly calling, how do we do something together around the Labor Day that's coming up, September 5th. Yusef Ravi is a progressive representative to the state of Michigan, I guess, House, who has some real, I'm going to say, class awareness that speaks out. He's going to be at the Detroit Labor Day thing. We're probably not going to go to the Mackinac Bridge. I think Detroit's going to be the focus for Labor Day. I don't even know what's going on in Rayburn. But I'm putting out a call for let's work together to do something together in the context of the coming Labor Day.
I have a proposal. We don't have to take it, but perhaps for Labor Day, we can have an anti-war contingent for the Labor Day parade, you know? Linking up labor and peace and march together.
Thank you for that proposal. So we're going to wrap up, but as we see, there is a ton of networking that can be done. A lot of us are doing amazing things, and as we continue through our journey, we have to continue to nourish ourselves and know that we're all in this together, and that's what Bill always speaks of and Michigan Peace Council speaks of. So thank you so much for being here. Can we give a round of applause to our panelists? And stay tuned, we're going to have a part 3 very soon. So if you haven't signed up, please sign in and get some more food on your way out. Take care.